Welcome to episode 343 of the Postal Hub podcast. I'm Ian Kerr. Joining me in a moment is Axel Dekker. Axel is the CEO and co-founder of Packaly. Joining me on the line is Axel Dekker. Axel is CEO and co-founder of Packaly. Axel, we're going to get into some really interesting operational stuff later on and talk about emissions, all that sort of wonderful stuff. Well, monitoring emissions and hopefully reducing emissions. Let's start with a bit of an overview of Packaly, though, because it's a name people outside of Europe might not be familiar with. So just give us a bit of an overview. Tell us about how and why Packaly was founded.
Sure. Well, it's great to be here. Packaly was founded around 4 or 5 years ago with the idea of making last mile delivery more efficient and basically setting up a network of bike couriers that basically go to a store, pick up a parcel, and then drop it off to the consumer the same hour. I think our fastest delivery was in like 7 minutes or something. It was quite close, but we were all up to speed. Or next day, same day evening, we just had all kinds of offerings. It basically started out of the idea that my AirPods were traveling a long route, which made absolutely no sense for my feelings. And we just went to a drawing board and started drawing it out. We had some friends that were bike delivery guys for Deliveroo, like the food delivery companies. And yeah, that's where the idea got born. I think that we all got a bit frustrated of products already being in the city that could just be delivered from a store right to the front door. Which was basically the first concept.
And so tell us a bit about the kind of delivery drivers or riders who are involved in Packaly.
Yeah, so in the beginning, it was all freelance riders. So it was quite a nice way to start. And what we found out quite quickly is that when you pick up food, for example, you pick up 1, maybe 2 orders from a food delivery place. And what you could do when you were delivering parcels is you can just basically put as many parcels in the route as fit in the vehicle that you were using. So if you were using a cargo bike, you could use much more space. If you were using a backpack, you could still fit in quite some e-commerce orders. So we started to facilitate quite quickly already like pretty good routes. So the freelancing model was in that sense a little bit advanced compared to food delivery because you had a way higher earning grade on an hourly base. Nowadays, we also work with local partners. So what we saw is we were building basically exactly the same courier company as a local partner was already doing in the same city. So we were building 2 competing companies. And that made no sense for us because we tried to be efficient, we tried to be sustainable, we tried to reduce the amount of routes and stops in the city or make them more sustainable. And competing then with exactly the same kind of concept in terms of the last mile partners didn't really make sense.
Tell us about where you're operating then. So what markets are you present in at the moment?
Yeah, so the best markets for us is like the large cities. So in the Netherlands, for example, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague, like those kind of cities is where we see the most density and also the most volume. But we operate, I think, around a little bit of over 45% of the population in the Netherlands with bikes or EVs. And that's just growing bigger and bigger. So we're connecting partners now around the country, but we're also in Belgium and we are looking to the European market this year, next year to expand. So it's mainly in the Netherlands and Belgium.
What you mentioned earlier about working, how you're finding your customers in the first instance. So how do you work then? Do you work directly with retailers as just an add-on to their online store, or do you partner with some of the bigger carriers that might be national or cross-border operators?
Yeah, so we can do both basically. So there's two ways of how we do business nowadays. We started off with the whole ship from store setup. And we still do that, and we operate it for quite some customers that have retail presence. But if you don't have retail presence in a city, you don't have a ship from store solution because you don't have any local stock. So we built a ship from hub solution, we call it. And basically every day there's supply coming from those warehouses to a local sorting center. And that sorting center sorts everything, brings it to the local hub, and that's distributed inside the same last mile route the same evening. So basically, we can facilitate any e-com player. If it has stores or it doesn't, that doesn't really matter.
Tell us then about some of the operational side of things. How do you mentioned that you've got electric vehicles in some routes and bike courier style operations on some others. So how do you match all of that together? Because if you've got a customer that might be shipping, well, I don't know, shoes or something like that, well, then you've got an idea of how big the shoebox might be, but other customers, it might not be so standardized. So how do you choose the right vehicle for either for a delivery round or for a customer?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I think also one of the pain points you see in logistics a lot is when the parcel actually exceeds the limit of what it's claiming to be. So obviously we have a favorable customer profile. So we see a lot of fashion as customers, which works really well because it's small parcels, they're lightweight, a couple of t-shirts doesn't really weigh that much. Those are like the ideal customer profiles. But we can also go bigger. So there's basically two algorithms on the background running. One is a bin packing algorithm that basically looks at if I have a box and that box needs to fit in certain smaller boxes. So let's say the cargo bike, it basically knows this is the size of the cargo bike and I can fit these parcels inside that cargo bike. And it basically makes an algorithmic choice of what is the best vehicle to go into. So when the volume exceeds a certain size, it basically automatically says, hey, you should go for a larger vehicle if you want to do these kind of capacities. And we've built that on top of a algorithm that looks at routing that basically also decides what is then the route and what is the section of a city that you're delivering towards. So it starts to make these most efficient routes based on size, based on weight, based on distance. And it starts to think about way more than just saying, hey, this is point A, this is point B, and point C is the most logical way to go. It also looks at all these other factors that you need to take into account.
What you're talking about is a bit of a step beyond the simple, bolting on to ship from store, shall we say. You're not just picking up anymore. You're integrating into a route and making it into a more complex thing. And so how do you work out the limits then? It's not just the limits of the size, it's also the limits of the routes and things like that, isn't it? So if you've got someone on a bike, there's a physical limit as to how far they can deliver in a certain time frame. So is that part of the same formula?
Yeah, so I think, and this is always a great conversation I'm having with one of our operational people, our COO. There's such an operational complexity towards logistics that if you can build whatever software in the world that you want, and you can think about this in a software way. We were saying, hey, this totally makes sense. But in the end, you still have that physical parcel that needs to go to that front door. And if that exceeds its limit, or let's say it's 30 by 30 by 30, but in essence, that's wrong. And there's a mistake in the backend of one of our customers, and it's 40 by 40 by 40. The whole calculation doesn't match and it doesn't fit. So size in that sense is just super important to get operations right. But I do think that what we bring to the table is also knowledge and experience with our own riders to know what it means when something actually really doesn't fit. So then you either find a different driver that can do it with a different vehicle, or you need to optimize this. So we try to record all of these mistakes, so to say, and mark them, and then really look at, okay, what did the system do? And what is the best operational choice for us to improve this? This could be advising one of our partners to get a bigger vehicle because we see that their volume is growing. And if they want to tap into that, they need to get a different vehicle. That's really like a next stage where we want to go towards, helping and advising and helping these rather smaller companies occasionally to grow and to make the right decision on how they can be more efficient.
Well, how about delivery into city areas and especially the low emission zones, since we're hearing so much about low emission zones being implemented across the Netherlands? How do you cope with that?
Yeah, so we didn't really have a problem with that from the start because we started on bikes and on bikes only. So there was no EVs, no vans, electric vehicles, like those kind of things involved yet. We actually started with backpacks only. And in like the first couple months, our system couldn't cope with a cargo bike. So we were just oriented on this thing on your back. So we were actually just counting the days until that low emission zone gets closer and closer because, yeah, it's not a problem for us. Like we are on this side of the occasion and all the big carriers are on the other side trying to solve a big problem. So we also see that they're tapping into our sources and trying to understand what we're doing as much as possible because they see that we took an approach that I would say doesn't really create that problem for us. We can still enter the city. And that's also how we are selling towards customers. But you do see that they're most of the times pointing towards the carriers having to solve that problem. They're in the end the customer, right? So they just demand their parcels to be delivered.
You mentioned that you basically partner with other, micro delivery companies? How would you put it? So it might be some cases just a man with a van, or
Yeah,
well, that is that the sort of relationships typically it's like a contractor relationship often? Because that's what
yeah.
leads me to the next question. So how do you organize all of that when you've gone from being, as you said, ship from store to now, as you mentioned, you've sort of got micro logistics centers, or how would you call them? You're basically your hubs where you're going to be organizing the parcels to go out on the route. So how do you organize that logistics side of things? Are you finding your own delivery centers, or are you sharing spaces with other companies? How's that working out?
Yeah, so we don't own any physical location or vehicles. We partner up with the existing infrastructure. So we believe that delivery can be sustainable, but if you want to make the whole ecosystem more sustainable, you need to make use of the resources that are already there and help them change that towards something more sustainable. Otherwise, you're just creating another piece on the puzzle. So we partner up with those, call them local heroes, and we partner up with them. They have most of the times the expertise of the city itself, and we try to facilitate wherever we can. So if we get, for example, we get a lot of emails from new EV vehicles saying like, hey, try out our new cargo bike. We have this new awesome design. It's going to be more sustainable. It's going to be faster. And like, you get a lot of those emails. And we try to filter them out and send them to the local heroes saying like, hey, we actually think this might be a good choice or idea for you to look at. And next to that, we integrate all of this into our IT. So all of this is managed in our IT. And basically, when a shipment comes in from a customer, it automatically goes to the right direction and everything is accounted for, even like operational management. Everything towards billing, everything is handled in our own IT. And that also gives us the opportunity to advise local heroes what they could expand towards, how they could expand their operations, because might be a little bit technical, but our API basically functions as a yes/no signal in the beginning. So it basically gets a order submitted to the API, and it says we can do this, or no, we can't do this. And that basically means if the coverage of the local hero is there, we can do it. If it's not, we can't. But we do get that signal. So we inform these local heroes, say like, hey, add this small postal code site to your city, and you will get 500 orders more on a month-to-month base, which is we're basically in that sense an advisory. It sounds a bit like a consulting part, but we can consult them on how to expand on their own city.
So it sounds like tech is basically the crucial part of these operations. And I suppose that leads to the next question, which is that we are increasingly hearing that e-commerce retailers, no matter what sector they're in, want to have greater visibility and greater reporting of emissions. And they're looking at their entire supply chain, and now they're looking at the last mile. So what kind of expectations are you seeing from retailers when it comes to demanding last mile? Oh, I'll get it in a second. If it comes to demanding emissions reporting from their last mile partners.
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting topic. We've been spending a lot of time on this in the last months and even years, also with our board and with strategic advisors that we have. And what you see is that the large enterprise companies, they are forced to report on everything starting next year, I think. And then they have 12 months to get everything right and submit their first report. So end of 2025, they need to have a lot of information handed over. I think that's for like the top X companies around the world. And at some point, they're also going to add smaller companies. And I think that this is going to be a standard 2030, 2035, like a little bit in towards that direction for everyone. So we're preparing our software for this. And we already from day one started recording every single meter that we travel. So when a parcel gets submitted in a route, we look at what are all the waypoints, and we basically record all those waypoints to know what is the amount of meters that's traveled. So on the last mile part, we can already report them super clearly what has been the vehicle and what has been the amount traveled. What you do see is that it's something that not everybody is very experienced with yet. So there's also still a lot of questions on like, sure, but how many stops did your EV make? Was there a traffic light involved? It gets super, super, super detailed if you really want to do it well. So we work with averages at the moment, but this is something super high on our radar. And we also get requests from all our customers saying like, hey, can you give us more insights on how you traveled with the parcels and how we can improve this? And we see it as a key selling point as well.
So the demands from the retailers are increasing. And you mentioned that there are still some challenges to be overcome, though, when it comes to emissions reporting. Do you think that is there going to be a need for some sort of standardizing, though, out of all of this? I mean, otherwise, you mentioned averaging. One of my concerns is that at some point, delivery companies are just going to say, well, this is all too hard. We're just going to make an average. And there's not going to then be any incentive to improve consumer behavior or to improve delivery company behavior. I'm making a bit of a motherhood statement here, Axel, but is that the direction that we probably are heading in, though, that there will need to be some sort of standardization or some norms when it comes to reporting emissions in the last mile?
So the EU is already trying to make standards and already trying to make regulations, but they're basically pointing that now on like large companies. And I think that the standard between a smaller company and a large company is a huge difference. So I think that there's a lot of people thinking very hard on like, how do we standardize this? And I think that there's a couple ways on how to do this that are pretty good. I think there's a minus X degrees group of people that made a standard way of thinking, but it goes across the whole board of scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So on last mile, I think somebody needs to take the initiative to really dive further into that. But that also means that all the large carriers, they all need to collaborate and add their knowledge. Like in the Netherlands, there's 2 market leaders right now. If they don't contribute to getting the right calculation, you're losing 90% of the volume in the Netherlands in terms of insights. So I think if we, and this is maybe also a little bit of a sound towards the world, if we really want to fix this, we need to collaborate and shouldn't think about competition. We should really fix this problem together, in my opinion.
Well, Axel, we've covered quite a bit of territory there. And I think there's a lot for us to ponder in the delivery sector about this matter of emissions reporting as we head towards more low emission zones, more scrutiny from retailers, more scrutiny from government. Anyway, enough of me rabbiting on, everybody. Axel, if people want to find out more about Packaly, where should they go?
They can go to our website, packaly.com. They can send me an email on axel@packaly.com or go to our LinkedIn page, and I'm pretty sure our team will reach out to you as soon as possible.
I'll put a link to the Packaly website on the episode page on thepostalhub.com. So if you're out walking the dog and you're not able to look at it right now, just go to thepostalhub.com and go to the episode page, and you'll find the links through to Packaly's website and their LinkedIn page. Axel Dekker, CEO and co-founder of Packaly, thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today.
Thank you, Ian.
That's all for this episode of the Postal Hub podcast. Please do subscribe to the podcast in your favourite podcast platform, such as Spotify or Apple Podcasts or the Amazon one. If the podcast isn't on the podcast platform that you like or use, please let me know. Best way to let me know is via email. My email address is ian@thepostalhub.com. I'm Ian Kerr. Thanks for listening in, and look forward to your company next time on the Postal Hub podcast.